Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming through today. We're talking about the general and academic reading test. So we're going to talk about the similarities and differences between the tests. But the most important thing for today is all about our strategies to answer these questions. So let's take a moment. I'm going to share my screen here so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So here we go. We have the general and academic test. Of course, we want to be understanding the differences between these tests and what our purposes are, but we've covered that conversation in the past. We're going to be talking about the similarities and differences between the tests, the kinds of readings that we can expect, of course, the question types, but like I said, the most important thing for today is going to be our strategies. And then we'll look at some examples for those of us who haven't seen the test yet. Um, Overall, the two tests are pretty similar. They do have different lengths of the reading. They have different topics, but the question types are the same, and the strategies that we use are the same. So what this means for us is that if we are studying for the academic test, the general test practice resources are useful for us. And the opposite as well. So if you're studying for the general test, using an academic test to practice will be very good and very powerful practice. It will be difficult, but you will build those skills necessary. Hopefully you'll build those strategies, the reading strategies as well. So let's take a look at the general test. We have 3 sections with 40 questions, and you have 1 hour to complete the readings and the questions. The readings are shorter, but there is more of a variety than what you can expect on the academic test. Each question is 1 point. You get a point if you answer correctly, but you don't lose a point if you answer incorrectly. So what that means is if we're running out of time, we always guess. We're going to guess if we're uncomfortable with the question, if we aren't sure what's happening, go ahead and guess. You cannot lose. You only have something to gain. The types of reading on the general test come from a variety of styles, but we can think about this as survival English. Now, I don't want that to make you think that this is easy, because survival English is not easy. There's a lot of English that goes into surviving in a Canadian or American city. But we should be comfortable with styles like books, of course, magazines, news articles. News articles are great practice where we should be thinking, how much information can we quickly learn from the article that we're reading? So we should be able to spend maybe 10 seconds with a news article and get the main idea that's trying to be expressed. We should care about notices like from an apartment building or a landlord, advertisements for the grocery store or a shopping mall, rule handbooks, guides, how to get around in the bus inside of Toronto, for example. Being able to understand those notices and take information very quickly will be very important for this test. Like I said, although we're thinking about survival level English, that's not to say that it's easy. A lot of people are surprised when they see the kinds of reading that we need to do on the general test. It's not that it's difficult, but the strategies are important to be able to complete those questions in time. You're going to have several readings of different types. You're going to have a lot of a wider variety on the general test than you'll have on the academic test. We're going to go into a breakdown of the 3 sections for general reading. Section 1 is going to have 2 or 3 short texts. We should be thinking about schedules, timetables, advertisements. We talked about survival level English. Section 1 is social survival. So being able to survive in your town or your city and be relatively successful. We move on from social survival into workplace survival. So now we're talking about job training, understanding your responsibilities, maybe understanding work emails, understanding a contract. Are you able to go through job descriptions very quickly and decide which ones are available for you or which ones you could be applying for? We should be able to have that level of English to be doing well on this part of the test. Finally, section 3 is going to have one long text. The long texts are more common on the academic test, but you're always going to have one long one in section 3. It's going to be a longer reading. It's going to be more complex, maybe a little more abstract. And it's possible that the subject matter will challenge you. These kinds of ideas, we're still within the realm of things that are general. So it's probably general interest topics, cars, fashion, maybe a little bit of history, but nothing too specific. It's a general context reading. Something like a news article or an excerpt from a book would be very reasonable for this section. For the academic reading, we don't need to talk about each section individually because the sections are relatively the same. We have 3 long readings, 1 reading in each section. The question and time, however, is the same. We have 40 questions and it's 1 hour to complete. The same idea with the points as well. So it's 1 point per question. You get a point if you answer correctly, but you don't lose if you're incorrect. So once again, even on the academic test, we don't want to be guessing, but if you have to, you might as well guess instead of leaving something blank. For your practice in academic reading, we want to be focused on many different kinds of texts. We should be really comfortable going to the library and being able to pick up a little bit of anything. We also want to be using different strategies in our preparations. All of those same resources that we're using for the general test reading, all of those are useful as well, the books, the magazines, the news articles, but we do want to add in some higher level university or professional reading, such as academic journals, of course, are a great choice. Higher level books, textbooks, maybe some manuals, like something a little more technical would be useful to see how you can pick out information. So all the same ideas are useful that we talked about on the general test, just with a little more advanced reading. The structure of the academic test is more straightforward than the general test. You have less variety, but the details are more important on the academic test. So when we start talking about strategies, your detail reading will be much more important on the academic test, while on the general test, your general reading, just identifying general ideas rather than specific ideas is more common. Task types. So the task types, this is what we call them. We call them tasks, but really they're questions. So there's different kinds of questions that you're going to need to be familiar with. Now, I have them listed here. We're not talking about all the different tasks today, but there are some things that we should pay attention to. So the first one that I have listed is multiple choice. Sometimes when we're confronted with multiple choice, we feel happy because maybe we think it's easy. And there's the idea that the question or the question has the answer somewhere on A, B, C, or D. Now, that's true, but multiple choice can be extremely challenging on this kind of test because we're fighting against time. We don't have time to read through everything that is being presented to us. And then even if we do, we read through everything, we're probably not going to remember the one small detail that we need to satisfy that multiple choice question. Multiple choice is a great example of why we need our strategies, because in something that we're studying a lot, maybe multiple choice is easier. But something that we are just seeing for the first time 5 minutes ago, it's not so easy. We really need to know how to identify information. Saying that about multiple choice, there's a lot of different question styles. When we see something like matching, again, a lot of people seem to think that that's an easier one. But when this is brand new information that we're not fully comfortable with, it's not as easy as it seems. In the past, some of you have mentioned that identifying the views or claims of the writer has been difficult for you. And that's very reasonable, but the strategies that we talk about today are going to help us satisfy those kinds of questions. Something that I would like to focus on, or I would like you to focus on rather, are these kinds of task types that we don't often see. If we're studying for the Ielts, especially the academic Ielts, I'm assuming that most of us have been to college or university. If we've been to college or university, we know the kinds of questions where in the writing section, for example, writing an essay, we should know the general structure. But for these kinds of questions, like labeling diagrams, according to what we've read, completing flowcharts, table completion, and note completion, these are ideas that we're not often doing. They are going to challenge you, these different kinds of questions, but there is good news here that not all of these task types are going to be on your test. If you are one of those people who are trying for the, if we're going to college, we probably need a 6.5. But if you're someone who's really trying to achieve and be competitive and you want an 8 or you want a 7 and above, it makes very good sense to understand these task types and have strategies that are associated with each task type. It takes time because there's 11 different kinds, but it is worth it. If you take detailed notes and you understand the task types, you will never be surprised on the Ielts, because once you understand the task types, you're more focused on the questions than the reading. This seems maybe the opposite of what a lot of us think of, because the information is in the reading. We're going to learn today that we don't really care about the information that is in the reading. We care about answering those questions effectively. By the time you are finished your reading section, you're probably going to forget about all the readings that you did, but hopefully you'll have 30+ correct answers. We don't really want to read everything that we have. We just want to find those answers by using our strategies, and understanding the task types is the first step of being able to identify what strategy to use. So this is an idea that I'm going to keep coming back to, because this is really how you unlock the test. It's not easy. It is time consuming. It takes some time to think about all 11 task types, but the recommended time to study for your Ielts is about 3 months. Some of us need more. A lot of us don't take 3 months. A lot of us probably do it in maybe a month and a half, right? But if you want to unlock your practice, if you want to unlock the test and be able to complete this test in a shorter amount of time, if you want to do it sooner rather than later, understanding the task types and the strategies that go with them are super important. So I keep talking about the strategies. Let's talk about them. We are using the language here that's from the Ielts people. It's sort of ESL teacher language. I would recommend giving your own name to the kinds of strategies that we're using. For our purposes today, I'm going to be calling them skimming, scanning, and detail reading. That's not my idea. That's not my name. That is just sort of in the industry. This is how we teach these kinds of ideas. The names are not so important. It's the strategies themselves. If this is a new idea for you, I would recommend studying them each individually instead of studying them all together. Take a week and practice your skimming. Take a week, practice the scanning, and then take a week and practice the detail reading. If you start slow and master the skills individually, they're going to naturally come together. And when you mix them together, that's when you're going to start going very fast through your reading section. How do we choose what strategy we want for the question? Of course, we want to understand our task types, like we just said, but really we want to understand the purpose of the question itself, understand the purpose of the task. So are we reading for a main idea? Are we reading for summary, for attitudes? The purpose that we have is always going to be in the questions that we have. So we have to be able to at least understand, I'm going to say very conservatively, 50% of the question. We need to have that general idea of what am I looking for? If you don't have that level of English yet, both the general and the academic test is going to prove to be pretty difficult for you. That's not to say that you can't get the score that you need, but maybe it is worth it for you to take a little bit more time to prepare your comprehension before you go ahead and pay for the test. I also want to pause, since we're getting into the strategy conversation. These strategies are, they seem very simple, but they're pretty hard to do. Not everyone is going to be amazing at this. This is not going to come naturally for all of us. But some of these strategies involve rapid eye movement. So moving your eyes through the page very quickly, and picking up keywords or information at the same time. Now, I work with a lot of people with varying degrees of ability, okay? If you're one of these people who maybe you have attention problems, maybe you have a documented medical problem with your eyes, with your body in some way, this is definitely something to keep in mind, and you can have accommodations. So rapid eye movement is not possible for all of us. And if you're one of these people, the test is based on being able to use your strategies. It's based on using your rapid eye movement. So if that's not possible for you, this test is no longer fair for you. This means that we request accommodation. I work with all kinds of people, people who have problems hearing, problems seeing, whatever the situation is. It could be attention deficit disorder. Whatever it is, there's an accommodation for you. We just need to apply. When we're dealing with money and when we're dealing with this test and immigration and all the different things that we need to worry about, we do not want to hesitate to take this accommodation if it's available for us. It's a very simple application. You might need to talk to your doctor and have them sign the paper, but it will be worth it for you. The accommodations could be, there's a variety. It could be extra time, which is very, very useful. It could be a private room. It could be maybe a slight modification to the format of the test, saying, so if you do have hearing problems, maybe for the listening, you'd have a different format. If you have seeing problems, maybe it's about more time, or it's about having some listening involved in these kinds of ideas. Depending on how severe, they might remove the section of the test completely, but it really depends on the Ielts people and you putting in your application for accommodation. So with that being said, it's definitely something to think about for those of us that applies to, but let's talk about our reading strategies now. So skimming, scanning, detail reading. Like I said, the names aren't important, but the information that they bring to us certainly is important. Just like we talked about with our writing last time, our strategies for reading are going from very, very general to a little bit more specific to very detailed. That's really the idea. So for our skimming, we are reading extremely fast, but we're not reading every word. We're going through quickly, looking for a general overview of the material. So let's think about what we do with a newspaper when we pick it up. The first thing I do is I read the headline, and then maybe I'm interested, so I do read every word. But if I'm not so interested, I'm going to skim through very, very quickly. I'm not going to look for details. I'm not going to go too in depth. I'm just looking for the general idea of the text. What's the emotion behind the words? What is this text trying to make me think or feel, or maybe understand, right? If we're just reading for main ideas is very general, right? So we should be able to take 10 seconds to skim through a short reading and identify what's the general overview? What are they talking about? We might not be able to create a detailed summary from that information, but we don't need to have a lot of details for some of the questions that we have. There's going to be at least 5 to 10 questions on the Ielts that you don't need to do any detail reading for at all. You can skim through, get a general idea, and the answer will be waiting for you. Now, skimming is not always enough, and that's when we go to scanning. So scanning, this is another skill that we've probably all used at college or university, because the readings that are assigned to us, we don't always want to read the whole thing, right? So what do? We maybe look at the outline for the class and we identify the specific things that we need to care about. We're using our keywords or maybe a keyword phrase to go through very quickly. We look for that word and then we locate the specific information that we're looking for. Like we talked about for the multiple choice question, there is something specific inside the multiple choice question that they are looking for. That becomes our keyword. We go to our text, we look for all the times where we find that word inside the text, and then maybe we do a little detail reading around it. But really, in a situation where we're identifying opinions, for example, we choose our keyword, we go through very quickly, we find that keyword, and then we read around it a little bit to see, is this person positive? Are they negative? Do they think this is good? Do they think this is bad? Skimming and scanning, I will say, are extremely important for both tests, but these will be the main focuses for the general test. If skimming and scanning are your strengths in reading, you will do just fine on the general test. But if we are going for a high level in the academic test, the detail reading becomes a lot more important. We're still using keywords to isolate main information, but rather than identifying a general opinion, let's think about understanding someone's argument. So they say that it's good or bad, but we need to know why. So we have to focus on that area of the text, really understand the words that are being used. So we're being as specific as possible with our understanding. The main idea to take away here, skimming is super general. Scanning, we're going to start using our keywords and just read in the area. But then detail reading, we must understand those ideas. For the general test, we can get away with not a lot of detail reading. We still want to be comfortable with it, but the skimming and scanning will become very, very important for not just answering correctly, but maintaining our time. I think the reading test and the writing test are probably the two hardest ones as far as the time is concerned. Sometimes people have difficulty filling up the time in speaking, but for our reading, we are always fighting the clock. We don't want to be the person who reads every word in the text and then we realize we have 5 minutes left, so now we need to guess everything. It's just not worth it. If we can use these simple strategies to go through fast and not waste our time reading things that we aren't really interested in, we just get those answers fast, it will be worth it for you. You will be happier after the test is done. Sometimes there's some confusion between skimming and scanning. What I'll say is this, scanning and detail reading go together because they both are involving our keywords. We're looking for a specific word and the ideas that go around them. We want to understand that information around the keyword. Skimming is completely different because in our skimming, of course, we're reading something fast, but we're not really locating specific information. It's still very general. So the main points, the general purpose of the writing, skimming can identify this hopefully in 10 to 15 seconds. It's a very fast reading of all the text from the top to the bottom, all the headers, all the subtitles, all those things. We want to read the maximum content. So we don't want to skim through, but forget what happens in the last couple paragraphs. We can't trust the test to be consistent. So if you're skimming through and let's say there's 10 paragraphs, you have to do all 10. Don't do 5, don't do 8. Make sure that the information stays consistent because they will try to trick you. Talk to anybody who's taken this test before, or people who have been looking at practice tests already know in the chat. The test will try to trick you. Don't allow it to trick you. The skimming is going to be giving us our general idea formation. So skimming is advisable for any reading that we do, just getting the general purpose of the writing. By the time you skim through, this doesn't mean that you're familiar with the text. It doesn't necessarily mean you're familiar with the main ideas, and you're definitely not familiar with where the information is in the text, which will become important when we need to answer our questions. That kind of stuff is going to be for our scanning. So in scanning, we're locating that specific information rather than general. We're still reading quickly, but more carefully than skimming for sure. It's a selective reading based upon only the words that we care about. So if our keyword is method, for example, we're going to go through, find that word, and now we have a selective reading around the places where that word appears. You're just reading the required information. So you choose your keyword from the question. Hopefully you choose that keyword well, and then you go and find the required information around that word. We are looking for specific facts in scanning, whereas in skimming, there's nothing specific about it. Also, in skimming, we don't really know what we're looking for. Maybe because the text is new, or maybe because we're being asked a question about what's the purpose of the text, right? But in scanning, you know exactly the information that you're looking for, and you're hunting for it You're searching for that specific keyword or key phrase, and then maybe we do some detail reading around it to increase our overall understanding, make sure that we chose the correct answer. So now, let's take a minute. We've talked about the task types briefly. We've talked about the strategies, which is the most important thing, but a lot of us haven't seen the test. So I'm going to bring up some texts onto the screen. And this is the part where usually some of us are a little bit surprised at the information that we're dealing with. So we're starting with the general reading. Of course, we are not going to start by looking at the text because, like we said, we don't really care that much about the text. We care about our answers. So because we were talking about multiple choice, the first questions here are multiple choice. We need to choose A, B, C, or D. You're usually only going to have 4 options. So let's look at question 1 and think about how we can use the text that we've seen. You might notice that this text is pretty long. It's a lot longer than most people are anticipating. If you don't have a strategy for reading, this makes you nervous because you're thinking that you're going to read all of this and it's going to take you 10 minutes, and that's bad. If you do have a strategy, you know we're not reading any of this unless we have to. They also have done something nice that is very common on the general test. They've separated each of our paragraphs into different ideas, but they're not very long, right? It's easy to identify which paragraph will have the information that we're looking for. As an extra tip, if you're a person who has difficulty organizing all the information in your head, maybe doing a fast skim reading of each paragraph and making a note or a subtitle for what information is being discussed. That would be my personal choice. If I was doing this test again, that's what I did. That's what people who are really organized and really understanding what's happening with the text and getting your answers quickly, that's what they would do. But it's not for everyone. There's hundreds of different tips about what's best. That's what I would recommend. So anyways, our first question here, what do pluralists believe? So that's pretty obvious what we're trying to do here. Pluralists. You probably don't know what a pluralist is. I don't know what a pluralist is, but the good news is we don't really care what a pluralist is, right? We are just looking for the answer. They've done something nice, even though they're using a word that maybe we're unfamiliar with, that's our keyword. If we go through to our text, we can generally assume on especially the Ielts general, that our questions are going to come in order from the beginning of the text down to the bottom. So what do pluralists believe? We're going to go and we're going to not skim anymore. We've already done our skim reading. Now we're going to scan with this keyword of pluralist. So we're going to go through paragraph A. There's not much there. We don't see anything useful. But as we go down to B, we immediately do find pluralists here, right? So that's an indication, of course, that we're in the right place. And even better, the question is, what do pluralists believe? This sentence starts, pluralists believe, okay? So we don't really need to do too much detail reading. We shouldn't stress about the detail reading, but the keywords and scanning will absolutely be totally important for these kinds of questions. We can continue on. What circumstances helped astronomers to study Mars in the late 19th century? As a general tip, anytime that you're given numbers, that's a great place to use. It's a great keyword or a key number in that case to use to find your idea because it's a number against a whole bunch of letters. If I'm looking for 19th century, I see it immediately just because it's a number, right? Being able to use these skills quickly and comfortably will make the difference between your 5 and your 6.5. A lot of people who have already taken this test, they scored a 5, but they need a 6.5 to go to college, but they were reading every word. Without a little bit of strategy, it becomes very difficult to do well on this test. And we're seeing now how fast these answers can come to us if we're able to do the scanning and then the detail reading afterwards. Multiple choice is something that we're all familiar with. I also talked about matching questions. So we like matching sometimes because we assume that there's always going to be an even number of things we need to match with answers. But this is not the case usually. on the Ielts test. We have more ideas than answers, so you can't use them all. So there's a lot of different information here. People sometimes like to look at the first information that they have in the reading, or in the question rather. Don't do this. Don't look at the first information. Look at the information that is going to be easiest to find in the text. If we go down to the actual questions, we see that this astronomer, whose idea we need to identify, Schiaparelli. Schiaparelli it's a crazy spelling. It's also a very different kind of word than what we're used to seeing. So that is our keyword. We should be able to very easily scan through with that as our keyword. Nothing here. Oh, maybe something. No. Schiaparelli in paragraph E. So we want to isolate that information as soon as possible. We do not want to read anything that we don't need to. So for example, you guys just watched me. We skipped paragraph C. We skipped paragraph D. We're not going to come back to it unless we absolutely must. We see the person that we're talking about in paragraph E, and then we're going to read through to see what he thought. We'll do our detailed reading, and then we'll identify which letter A to I is close to what we're saying. The answers are not always going to be the exact words from the text. It can be a summarized version. It could be a generalized version of what the person was saying. But each task has different rules associated with the task. So in this kind of task where we're matching, they can change the words. They can change the information. But for something like yes, no, not given, or the things that we are going to see for the academic test, they can't change the information. So we have to know the rules as well. That's a conversation that's maybe more in depth, but when you're thinking about your task types, you also think about the rules associated with those tasks. Are you looking for the exact words from the text and you can't change them? Or is it going to be a summarized version? If you need to write down the words, is there flexibility in what words you're able to write down? These are all ideas that you should be using in your practice. Last group of questions from the general examples here. We have a question type that's very challenging for a lot of people. It's yes, no, not given, or true, false, not given. I think the challenge here comes up with the no or not given, or false, not given. The general idea is that you have to identify, is this the opposite of what the text says? Because if it's the opposite, we're going to say no, or we're going to say false. If there's no way to know whether this is true or false because they haven't spoken about it, that's the situation where we're going to say not given. So discussion about whether there is life on Mars forms part of a long tradition. Okay, now let's think just logically here. We've seen how long this text is. We've gone through and we've already identified some keywords, even with only the couple questions that we looked at together. We're talking about the 19th century. So we're talking about, we see dates 1859, we see 1909, we see all kinds of dates throughout this whole reading here. We finished with 1910 and we started in the 1890s, okay? So logically, we could assume that, yes, this is a part of a long tradition, and we don't really need to spend too much time stressing out about looking for the exact information where this is a long time. Well, a century counts as a long time. We can logically assume that the answer is yes. So we're not always searching for the exact specific information. We can't always use our keywords to find the answer. Sometimes we just need to do old-fashioned logic. Does this make sense? Yes or no? Now for the academic reading, we'll talk about the questions, but let's look at the text first and compare the differences. We drew our attention to how the general reading is organized in such a way that's pretty nice, where we know A, B, C, D, we can make our own subtitles, but the academic test does not have that. It's also long. we're talking about a topic that we probably are not so familiar with, the history of the steam engine. Unless you're really a hobbyist who cares about steam engines, you probably don't know anything about them. So our paragraphs are bigger. There's more information there. They're harder to organize inside of our mind. So this makes all of our skills that much more important. If you do want to go ahead and do the skimming idea, like we talked about before, you do that. You skim each paragraph and make a small title about what they're talking about so you can come back to them later. But for us, we're going to look at the questions first, of course. We have some more multiple choice questions, or sorry, and more matching. We are matching the individual person, or it seems as if maybe they're inventors of some kind, with what they've done or with information about their invention. So we said last time that we don't always want to use the information that comes to us first, but in this case, if we look at the information below, his invention was the first to use moving parts. There's no real good keywords there. Allowed steam power to be converted into electric power. These aren't really keywords, these are details. So rather than focusing on the details, we want to go general, and we're going to use these names. Anytime that you can use a name as a keyword, it's the same idea as using a number as a keyword. It should be so obvious inside the text, so why not use that first? We're going to, like, let's say we want to focus on Thomas Newcomen first. We are going to probably not focus on Thomas, but we will use Newcomen because there are situations where they will only use the last name. So we want to focus on last names more than first names. If we scan through here with this as the keyword, we realize, okay, so the first paragraph is about Thomas Savery, our letter A. So that's probably not what we're looking for. But a few years later, Thomas Newcomen. We've identified that information right away. Within 5 seconds, we should be able to identify where all of these 4 inventors, where they're being discussed inside of the writing. Logically, we could assume that paragraph 1 is the guy for letter A, and paragraph 2 is letter B, but we can't always trust the test to be organized like this. There will be times where it just won't be. So we can't always depend on that. Sometimes we get a nice gift like what we saw here. So we use the last name only as the keyword. We go through. We see Thomas Newcomen. Once we have identified that, our scanning is done, and now our detail reading takes over. We look through. He improved the steam pump, and we learn more about what he did and how. And then we identify the simple summary that has been given to us in the question, what seems to be the closest to what we've seen in that information. When we're using our strategies, the questions become a lot easier, and it almost gets to a point where it feels like common sense. But if you are reading and focused on understanding every word, you're going to be reading this text forever, and you're going to be disappointed with the final result. We have a kind of an unusual question that we talked about where I was explaining about the task types. For the different kinds of tasks, some of them are more common, some of them are less common. You can probably assume that you're going to have some kind of multiple choice question on the test. You might not always have this kind of question, which is a flowchart, flowchart completion. Flowchart suggests that something starts, so something happens first, second, third, and so on. The instructions here are extremely important, and this is an easy way where people lose their points. They say no more than 3 words. Sometimes they will say no more than 1 word, no more than 2 words. I think no more than 3 words is about the most. It would be very rare to say no more than 4 words. But in this kind of question, you're going to use the exact words from the text. So understanding the task type and the expectations associated with the task become very important. If you make up your own words, you're going to have a problem, even if you have the right idea. So no more than 3 words suggests that for each answer, you can write 1 word, you can write 2, or you can write 3. You absolutely cannot write more than 3. Number 8 here, the miner's friend used condensed steam to. do something which sucked water from the mines. So we need to figure out who this miner's friend is, right? We're not going to use condensed steam because all of this is about condensed steam. That's not a good keyword. Maybe water from mines could be useful, but we're speaking about a specific person. Anytime we can use a name, let's use a name. As we scan through, we know that a flow chart is going to start from the top and go down to the bottom. So even though maybe we're uncomfortable with the flow chart style, it's a gift. It's a nice thing. They've organized our reading for us. So we go through looking for the miner's friend. As we go through, we see the miner's friend right away, second sentence. So we are going to do some detail reading because we find him at the end of the sentence. We're going to read his introduction to see that his invention designed to pump water out of coal mines. That sounds very familiar to what I've just seen in the question. He used condensed steam to do something which got the water from the mines. Sounds like he used the condensed steam to pump water out. Pump water or pump water out would be an acceptable answer to this question. So sometimes you can say it with three words. Sometimes you can say it with two. The best answer here is pump water because it's the most grammatical. Pump water out isn't the best, but it will still be acceptable here. And then we continue on with the exact same strategies that we're using before. But because we understand this task type now, we know that the next answer is coming underneath and lower and lower. So as we answer the question, we have a marker on the text where now we only need to go lower. So you learn your task types, you learn your strategies, you practice your reading to fit in the time that we need. Now it's time to get your score. In the reading in the writing and the speaking, like we've talked about for the past couple weeks, the answers or the way that you get your grade is a little confusing for someone who's working alone. But this is the good news about the reading. There's absolutely no reason that you can't be practicing effectively on your own. And the way that it's scored helps that as well. Because if you're using practice tests, your score is directly how many points you got, right? That makes sense. I want to draw our attention to a similar idea to what we've been speaking about before, where let's say you want to go to college, right? So you need a 6.5 probably, which means that you need 32 questions out of 40. That's a competitive score. You only got 8 wrong. That's pretty competitive. It's not easy to do for a lot of us. But maybe you only need a 4 or a 4.5 for your particular program. In any other context, if you get a 4, you failed the test, but not for the Ielts. If you get 15, 16, 17, or 18 answers correct out of 40, so 15 out of 40, that's not a great test. You still get your 4. If you get 19 to 20, suggesting that you have 50% of the answers correct, you have a 4.5. So the possibility of you getting the score that you need, maybe it's much more possible than what you think. Understanding the rubric, understanding the way that you get your score should guide your practice, and maybe you're already ready to take the test. If you're not using official practice resources, why not? This is your invitation. Go. There's all kinds of practice tests online. Take a look. Even if the test is extremely difficult, take a look at your score and identify your band score. I talk to all kinds of people who will come to me for IELTS help and say, hey, I need an IELTS class. Now, I want to teach an IELTS class, but the reason that they're looking for a class is because they did the practice test and it was just very hard. Now, it's not supposed to be easy. It's not going to be easy for a lot of us. But for some of us, when we have a difficult test, we don't even look at our score. This is a mistake because even if it's very, very hard, you still might be ending up with a 5 to a 5.5. Always follow through and grade your section completely. The reading section is one of the things that you don't need somebody else to work on with. Hopefully, if you take the time to learn those task types, understand the strategies that we're talking about, this should be more than enough for you to go with those practice tests and improve your skills slowly but surely. After a couple months, you definitely should see an improvement. And if you don't, maybe you need to go and review the task types and the strategies that we talked about. There are some other ideas that I want to talk about. The ways that we practice are important. And this is a little confusing for some of us because just because you're reading a book doesn't mean that you're practicing IELTS reading. If this was a general English class, absolutely. We would be reading a book every single day. I would be giving you lists of different books that I want you to read, and I want to have conversations about it. I want to talk about the author. I want to talk about biographies, all these good things that we get from books. This isn't IELTS reading, right? And we see that from today, that doing well on this test is not really about the reading as much as it is about identifying information. So that's something to be thoughtful about. Identifying information is always number one. Sitting down and reading Harry Potter is great for entertainment, not great for our IELTS practice. But if you wanted to use your favorite book, let's start using our strategies on our favorite book. Take 30 seconds to skim through a whole chapter and give me a light summary of the information inside. Well, now we're practicing our IELTS skills, right? So not all practice is equal when it comes to the IELTS. If you're not using those strategies, you're not building those skills. We also need to be reading a wide variety of texts for both the academic and general prep. In certain ways, maybe we even need more of a variety for the general preparation because there's different kinds of survival that we're talking about, the social, the work survival, the general interest. You are going to need to be identifying information about maybe class schedules, bus schedules, tourist information. You'll need to compare different points about maybe different kinds of academic programs. We want to be reading everything, even if it's just the information on the back of a can or something like that. We want to be able to identify information in a lot of different contexts. We should be able to be explaining fast summaries, main points, the viewpoints of the speaker, and details. So these are using all of our skills. We should be able to skim through and say the purpose of the article or the purpose of this chapter is to do this. Then maybe we identify a couple keywords. That should show us some main points. And then we detail read to go even further and make sure we have complete understanding. Once again, if you're reading 100% of the reading, you're not doing the right thing. We do not want to read 100%. We are not going to have enough time if that's what we're doing. How do you know when you're prepared? You should be able to use your reading strategies on any text from a children's book level all the way to an academic journal. Now, for some of us, that seems a little silly, but it's not. If you're at the point where your vocabulary is not so good yet, still practice these skills because not everybody needs a perfect score. Being able to do this with a children's book, it's like it's the beginning, right, of practicing these strategies. Doing a chapter of the book that you're reading for entertainment, that's great. Eventually, we're going to want to be able to do it with an academic journal or a manual, a technical manual, if we're taking the academic test. But starting with things that are interesting to you and just focusing on your strategies is more than enough, at least to get us into the routine. You can do this test and achieve a relatively decent score with no strategy, right? Some of us are very strong readers. We can go through pretty fast and answer the questions, but why would you? If you can save more time to go and review your answers, if you can identify the information quickly and confirm in your mind that you have the correct answer without reading all the information and wasting time, why would you? Reading the whole text should never be an option for us, even though it's possible, even though maybe we can, is not really an option. There's no reason, like I said, that you can't do this on your own time. You don't need to contact anybody for free IELTS practice tests because there's thousands online. You should absolutely be looking at the free materials and then you grade yourself afterwards. If you have a practice test, it comes with the answers as well. Make sure that you follow through to get a good idea about your score. It's always surprising to me when I'm meeting with someone who's practicing for the Ielts test, but they haven't seen the test and they have no idea of what their general score could be because they never followed through and finished and looked at their overall score. This is always something. Anytime you complete a section, we want to see the score because we want to track our progress to make sure that your strategies are improving and that your skills are actually improving for this test. So definitely think about the scores that you're getting. That's the main information that I want to get across for today. For those of us on the live, thank you for joining in. I'm going to stop the live right now, but if anyone there has any information or any questions rather, send me a message. We'll talk.